Greetings, Culture Warriors. It is I, Jeff Vieira, the author of Culture is Everything, and your host for this latest dispatch from the front. More bad business news for you today, I'm afraid. This one is from Footwear News. I must say that I'm not generally a purveyor, but this story leapt out of me. It's by Sheena Butler Young. More than a third of CEOs say they'll have to cut jobs in the next year. The rippling economic effects of the coronavirus pandemic will continue to plague the United States workforce for months and years to come, causing persistent layoffs across industries, indicates a group of CEOs surveyed by the Conference Board. The think tank today released its measure of CEO confidence report for the third quarter, which showed chief executives' confidence edge up 1 point from 44 to 45, compared with Q2. A reading below 50 points reflects more negative than positive responses. However, 38% of those same leaders said that over the next 12 months they expect to reduce their workforce. What's more, 37% say they will trim their capital spending budgets by 10% or more. With economic uncertainty likely to drag on into the foreseeable future, more than a third of global leaders surveyed do not expect to increase employees' average wages over the next 12 months. Nearly 50% indicated they will increase wages by less than 3%. Without substantial containment of COVID-19, widespread uncertainty will continue being the dominant cloud hanging over America's CEO community, said Bart Van Ark, chief economist of the Conference Board. With more than one-third of CEOs planning to make workforce and sizable capital spending reductions over the next year, the effects on the economy could extend beyond the next 12 months. Latest CEO confidence results were part of a new collaboration between the Conference Board and the Business Council. The project saw a majority of the council CEOs, all of whom helm global organizations surveyed. Today's report follows months of macroeconomic pressures for companies around the world grappling with the economic fallout of the health crisis. Over the past few months, many U.S. employers facing dwindling liquidity amid widespread closures turned to mass furloughs or layoffs to keep their businesses afloat. Just last month, in a separate Conference Board survey of more than 1,300 CEOs and C-suite execs, most leaders said they expect to emerge from the COVID-19 health crisis using more contract workers and fewer permanent staff. All right, there's a little bit more to the article here, but that is the nugget of it. I want to call out a couple of things for your consideration here. And then we'll get into our usual analysis of values and culture associated with this news story. So now, first off, I want to point out that CEOs are not soothsayers. If they were, they wouldn't lose their jobs. What they are is a reflection of whatever happens to be going on in the moment. And CEOs are quite famous for taking trends at the present which cannot continue and extending them into the future. It's reminiscent of a conversation I had with somebody early on in the pandemic where they claimed that the problem with our response in the United States of America to the pandemic was that we just didn't understand exponential growth. And they said, when you look at the virus, starting from one carrier and then getting on to everyone they infect and everyone they infect, it winds up being exponential growth. And it's just like when you look at a lily pad in a pond and you see how fast that lily pad grows. And this person completely misunderstood the bell-shaped curve associated with any virus. So yes, there is a portion of the curve which grows exponentially upward in the early days. Then it levels out at the peak, and then it exponentially declines until the amount of new cases asymptotically approaches zero. What does asymptotically mean? It means it approaches but never quite touches zero. That's your classic bell-shaped curve. That's what the pandemics look like. That's the notion. When someone says flatten the curve, what did they mean? That's what they meant. They meant bring the peak down But of course, even that was kind of stupid because the way you bring a peak down in this kind of thing is by extending the period of the peak. So you flatten it literally, you make it a plateau rather than a nice bell-shaped peak. And what that generally means is that the area under the curve, the amount of cases you have, gets larger. All you're doing is delaying the inevitable, in other words. And so the point of flattening the curve was to avoid hospitals becoming overwhelmed at a certain point. That never became a real problem because it turned out that the peak itself was a lot smaller than the models that we relied upon forecast. So we could have done nothing and been much better off. So my response to the person with the lily pad analogy was simply this. Then why isn't every pond choked with lily pads? They had no response. Of course, the answer is because once a lily pad gets to a certain size, it stops growing, and that's the end of the lily pad. There are countervailing forces at work that keep a pandemic from, say, killing everyone on the planet. And that, not least of which, is that if you had a horror pandemic such as Ebola, the more vigorous the disease, the more quickly it kills its host. The more hosts it kills, the more difficulty the disease has jumping to the next host. Successful viruses, therefore, are those which are able to not kill the host, but infect them and move on. They are generally mild in symptoms. And this is why, by the way, the cold virus is still around. It has a fair amount of mutation associated with it, but the symptoms are generally mild. And very few people die from it, so that makes it an effective way for the virus to live, because the virus is hosted in human beings. So if you want to be successful and live on as a virus generation after generation, you need to have a way to propagate without killing your host. The coronavirus is merely a type of cold virus. You'll note another thing on there when they say that without substantial containment of COVID-19, widespread uncertainty will continue. Well, there's two things wrong with that statement. Number one is COVID-19 isn't going anywhere. The previous coronaviruses haven't gone anywhere. Right? Every season there's a new version of it. Sometimes it infects a lot more people. Sometimes it has more severe symptoms, sometimes less severe. But the fact is that it's always around, just like influenza. Influenza hasn't left us. We had the great outbreak of the Spanish flu in 1918, and influenza still continues 102 years later, right? Once these viruses are out in nature and airborne, they don't tend to get completely exterminated on their own. And because of the rate of mutation that they have, well, you're not likely to find a vaccine which will wipe out the entire class. The best you can generally do is have some effective treatments, which we do in hydroxychloroquine and zinc and erythromycin. So it's kind of nonsense to think that, well, we can't open up the economy until this virus is gone. That's been proven utterly false. This virus has a average age of death for those claimed by it, which is higher than the average life expectancy rate. It's completely foolish to keep locked down. It's stupid, counterproductive. Sweden, among other countries, has demonstrated that we only do ourselves harm by maintaining these economic lockdowns. The other thing that they talk about is, well, economic uncertainty will continue. There has never been a time in your life or mine or in the thousands of generations that came before us where there was an economic uncertainty. That's simply the truth. And if you thought that there was ever such a time, well, you should have put in all your money into whatever stock most benefited from that steady prediction and made your billions. But the fact is obviously that's not the case. There are a lot of people betting on stocks every day, and some of them lose a lot of money. So if there was no economic uncertainty, how could that be the case? Even if the economic uncertainty asymptotically approaches zero, then you have to deal with the political uncertainty. And the fact of the matter is that the government has to have their greedy little incompetent fingers in every market pie. And so that will inject uncertainty. During the height of the Great Depression, the price of gold, which was the backing of our currency at the time, the US dollar, the price of gold was arbitrarily determined by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, sometimes on the basis of his wife Eleanor Roosevelt's horoscope. So uncertainty is going to exist as long as idiots rolling chicken bones in a hat continue to comprise our government. If not, simply because the distribution of resources throughout an economy is always going to be uneven, and that is going to lead to some measure of economic uncertainty accordingly. So what does this story tell us about the values? Well, number one is that I think you can intuit from it what CEOs' values are. Do they value their people? Was there any indication that they are trying to hang on to as many people as possible? Or do they view their people as though they were captains of a hot air balloon, and show that should they not fly high enough, they need to throw yet another sandbag with arms and legs and a head over the side of the basket to free up the weight that's dragging that mighty balloon down? I think it's obviously the latter. The way they're dealing with uncertainty is to treat people as though they are contributing to the poor performance of the business. A lot of companies will pay lip service to the notion that people are our greatest asset, but you don't take your assets and get rid of them for nothing. And that's what they're doing with furloughs and layoffs. They're just getting rid of people for nothing. In the short term, that can make some sense if their demand is so fallen that they don't have enough to do to keep people busy, and they wind up overstaffed, and it's a good chance to take the less productive workers and remove them from the equation. The problem is that's never how they do it. It was interesting, a number of years ago I was working for Bank of America, and on the technology team at Bank of America, we were called together by an executive who had recently taken over, and she asked us to brainstorm ways to make us more efficient because our budget was out of line with where it needed to be, and we needed to figure it out. So we spent a few days and came up with some real bold ideas as to how we could improve the overall productivity of the group. And what do you think happened then? Well, when we reported out to the junior executives, they immediately redlined everything we did, sent us away, and then rewrote the list themselves. When this was presented to the executive running the team, she was very disappointed. She said, well, I thought you guys would really come up with some wild-eyed, innovative ideas, but since you didn't, I guess we'll just do what we always do and go collect badges. And who do you think those badges came from? Do you think the badges came from the junior executives? No, the badges came from those of us who proposed innovative ideas. So it was a win-win for the people who crapped all over doing anything innovative, because they protected their own butts and they removed from the equation forever people who would challenge the status quo. There's a certain sort of evil genius in such undertakings, but what does it tell you that the organization really values? Does it value innovation? Does it really value productivity? No. The organization values doing whatever is easiest for the people who run the organization. It's got nothing to do with what's effective. They frankly don't care. They would just as soon go collect a badge, give out a package, and then X equals X minus 4 for any given team. And then they rearrange the work, and then life goes on. And even better, if service levels fall, if they fail to hit their metrics, they have a ready-made excuse now. Well, I'm understaffed. Evil genius. No less evil for its brilliance. And that is how CEOs see the world, because where do you think the CEOs come from? They come from the ranks of those executives. The same unthinking fools who took an opportunity, a genuine opportunity to make the business better, and wiped their wide bottom with it. Those are the folks who now, some 10 years later or so, are running companies. And those are the guys who get, and they are largely guys, who get interviewed as to where they think the economy's going. And with no earthly clue, they just say whatever the zeitgeist says. And that's about it. Because you see, people think that being a CEO is about visionary leadership, and it's about setting a bold direction so that your company can thrive in a marketplace of cutthroat competition. They think about it in a rather Darwinian sense, but it's not. It's not that way at all. All it is an expectations game. And what happens is, for the vast majority of these people, is the day they get named CEO is like the day they won the lottery. Millions of dollars are thrown at them. They do their time. And if they're lucky, they'll manage to get enough tenure in there where maybe they'll get another CEO job when they fail at this one. If they're really lucky, maybe they'll be able to ride this one into the barn of retirement. And then they can, assuming they didn't botch things too badly, maybe they can sit on a board here and a board there and just jet around for board meetings and hammer checks. But the CEOs who really change anything are very few and far between. And I guarantee you, you know who they are. You know their names, because they're the same CEOs we bring up all the time. But the vast array of mediocrities, of failures, of self-servers, those guys you never really know. They come and they go. Somebody's got to sit at the top, and so somebody does. But that's all they do. They are there to be CEO. They're not there to do anything. They're not there to lead a company. They're there to have the title, to have the office, to have the paycheck. And then inevitably, when someone comes in and tells them that their time is done, they pick up their money and their severance package, and they shuffle off to the country club to await whatever do-nothing job is going to follow. That, sadly, is what business has devolved to in so many an industry. And so how much stock would I put into what they have to say? A little bit. If they say they're going to fire a bunch of people, well, that's the one thing they do. So chances are that's probably a pretty good bet that they will fire a bunch of people. But what will it do for their company? That's the mystery. There are a lot of companies just wholesale going under. Big names, brands that have been around a long time. And they're finding that in a crisis like this, when you need visionary leadership, when you need someone who will do something, not just be someone, they're finding that our stock of those people is really very tiny for a country our size. I would keep an eye on what the CEOs known for doing something are doing. Keep an eye on them and what they're saying. So you take a guy like Elon Musk. Love him or hate him, he does something. Keep an eye on what he's saying about what's going to happen in the future. Because I think that'll tell you one heck of a lot more than surveys of these kind of gray-suited nobodies. Thank you and have a great day.